know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gale Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This talk continues my revisionist history of the Lincoln County War. It's covered in talks 12 to 17. The information is from my book, The Santa Fe Ring versus Billy the Kid, The Making of an American Monster. On February 18, 1878, territorial ring boss Thomas Benton Catron succeeded in exterminating his Lincoln County mercantile ranching and banking competitor, John Henry Tunstall, who had also started exposing the ring in the press. By then, Catron was an old hand at eradicating competitors and at annihilating adversaries in anti-ring uprisings of 1872 and 1876. The Colfax County War, ongoing since 1873, still simmered ineffectually. In 1875, Catron was behind assassinating its anti-ring leader, Reverend Franklin Tolby, and behind shielding his murderers. He likely expected an identical rerun in Lincoln County. In Colfax County, enraged and intellectual citizens had sent a flurry of exposés of Catron, his ring, and their crimes to President Rutherford B. Hayes and his cabinet men. The citizens were unaware that the Hayes administration was in Catron's pocket. Secretary of State William Evarts had even worked as an attorney with him and co-boss Stephen Benton Elkins in 1870 to cheat Lucien Bonaparte Maxwell out of his 2-million-acre Maxwell land grant. So the exposés were ignored. Catron was in for a surprise. His minions had done everything right. The responsible murderer, Sheriff William Brady, shielded his outlaw killers while lying that they were not on his posse. He illegally imprisoned Town Constable Atanasio Martinez and his deputies Billy Bonney and Fred Waite to block their serving murder warrants. He also immediately involved Catron as U.S. Attorney to request President Hayes's authorizing of troops to intimidate Lincolnites. And Governor S.B. Axtell issued an illegal proclamation to void Justice of the Peace John Wilson's arrest warrants for Tunstall's murderers and to outlaw Wilson's legally deputized warrant servers, including Billy Bonney. The surprise was that abused Lincoln County citizens did not withdraw into embittered silence, as had Colfax County citizens. Instead, they chose revolution. Revolution had been foreshadowed in the 1876 Grant County Rebellion. There, citizens wrote a Declaration of Independence from the ring at the 1876 centennial of the American Revolution. But these citizens did not take up arms. In Lincoln County, they did. The United States was born in revolution and declaration of its independence from England on July 4th, 1776. Still fettered by slavery, it was further liberated by revolution in its Civil War almost 100 years later. Thomas Jefferson, as an author of the Declaration of Independence, had opined in a January 30th, 1787 letter to fellow freedom fighter James Madison that a revolution at least once every 20 years is a medicine necessary for the sound health of government. And Jefferson's call to rebellion in the first declaration had led British citizens of the 13 colonies to victory. He wrote that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, meaning for freedom, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. In his Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln completed that declaration. He declared that on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state shall be thenceforward, and forever free. Slightly over a decade after slavery's end, revolutionary spirit in New Mexico Territory led to fighting Santa Fe Ring slavery. Jefferson, in that January 30th, 1787 letter to James Madison, had anticipated such a crisis. He wrote that in United States government, quote, the will of everyone has a just influence. That was opposite to, quote, governments of force, as is the case in all other monarchies, which is a government of wolves over sheep. By 1878, the wolves of force were unchecked in New Mexico Territory. But freedom was alive in recent memory. To common people, democracy held the vigor of its revolutionary victory of 1776, with sacrifice of 50,000 dead and wounded, and the Civil War, spilling blood of over 646,000 dead and wounded, had touched the lives of those now living. Thomas Benton Catron had underestimated Lincoln County citizens and democracy's power when he had John Tunstall murdered. For them, July 4th, 1776's Declaration of Independence was vivid. It proclaimed, when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. Catron had bet on Lincoln County succumbing to his Colfax County tactics of malicious prosecutions and assassination. Instead, the Regulator movement arose. It had John Tunstall as a martyr. It had Alexander McSween as leader. In the wings, it had a symbol of their militant zeal. Teenage Billy Bonney was about to enter the world stage. Tunstall's employees named themselves Regulators. The Mexican population joined the cause. The ring would face a long overdue Hispanic uprising. And territory-wide, that Hispanic majority could have broken the ring by votes or combat. But a critical vulnerability was isolation. Residents knew about Catherine's ring, but not its power or past uprising against it. They wrongly believed in protection from President Hayes, unaware of his ring loyalty and co-boss Stephen Benton Elkins's Washington influence. They never suspected local military alliance with the ring, and they had no newspapers to give a voice to rebellion. But all was counterbalanced by their willingness to fight and to die for liberty and justice. The original Regulators were 18th century American colonial pre-Revolutionary War freedom fighters extolled in song and dime novels. The Regulator movement began in North Carolina in 1771, before the Declaration of Independence. Their fight mirrored Lincoln County's. It was against corrupt public officials and lawmen. In North Carolina, public official elites conducted land grabs. Poor homesteaders working to purchase their land relied on credit and payment by harvests. They were subjected to stolen land titles and usurious interest. Pious pacifist activists failed to get justice. By 1768, militant regulators arose. They were inspired by 1765 Stamp Act protesters, the Sons of Liberty, who opposed British taxation of stamped paper like newspapers. North Carolina's counterpart of New Mexico Territory's 1870s ringite governors was Governor William Tryon. He dissolved the legislature to block its delegates from attending New York City's Stamp Act Congress, which repealed the act. Citizens believed it was government's duty to protect freedom. They believed fighting tyrant Tryon regulated government to that end, so they called themselves Regulators. Governor Tryon used troops to suppress them. Foreshadowing the Santa Fe Ring's outlawing of adversaries, Colonel Edmund Fanning called Regulators outlaws in defiance of law and contempt of authority. Tryon wrote that the Regulators were destroying the peace of this government and the security of its inhabitants. The final fight was May 16, 1771's Battle of Alamance. There, 2,000 leaderless Regulators, lacking ammunition, met 1,100 British troops with 6 swivel guns and 2 brass cannons. 3 Regulators sent to negotiate peace were taken prisoner by Governor Tryon. He shot one in sight of the others. Then Tryon's army rampaged, destroying farms and crops of Regulator leaders. 6 Regulators were hanged in retribution in Hillsborough on June 19, 1771. Lincoln County Regulators may have heard North Carolina Regulators' freedom song. From Hillsborough town, the 1st of May, marched those murderous traitors. They went to oppose the honest men that were called the Regulators. Billy Botting himself was being politicized. The day after Tunstall's February 18, 1878 murder, he gave an eyewitness affidavit to Justice of the Peace, John Squire Wilson, along with Tunstall's foreman, Richard Dick Brewer. They named the killers as Sheriff Brady's posse men, quote, James J. Dolan, Frank Baker, Jesse Evans, George Davis, A.H. Mills, W.S. Morton, William Moore, George Hindman, Frank Rivers, Pantaleon Gallegos, diverse other persons unknown. That yielded Wilson's February 19th arrest warrants for the murderers. By June 8th, 1878, Billy gave his deposition on John Tunstall's murder to investigator Frank Warner Angel. Justice of the Peace Wilson was witness. It's presented in Talk 8. Key to comprehending real Lincoln County war history is the lawmen's status and legality of those pursuing Tunstall's killers, including Billy Bonney. That added urgency to the ring's illegal outlawing of them to cover up their legitimacy and to cover up the illegality of Sheriff Brady's refusal to do so. With Billy's and Brewer's affidavit on February 20th, Justice of the Peace Wilson prepared arrest warrants. Sheriff Brady illegally refused to serve them. So Wilson took over based on, quote, there being then and there no officers to serve such warrant. He added, the undersigned, as directed by law in such cases, specially empowered Richard H. Brewer to serve the same warrants endorsing such deputation. This enabled deputizing of Billy and Fred Wade as deputy constables under Lincoln Town Constable Atanasio Martinez to serve the arrest warrants. Additionally lawful was attorney Alexander McSween's pursuit of justice for John Tunstall. He determined that murder of a British subject like Tunstall triggered federal investigation. On February 23rd, he filed a complaint with British Ambassador Sir Edward Thornton. And for the remainder of his life, a mere 146 days before his own ring murder, McSween never lost faith that legal justice would prevail. With Justice of the Peace Wilson's arrest warrants, Special Constable Brewer, with Tunstall's men, including Billy, as his posse, on March 6th, apprehended Tunstall murderers William Buck Morton, Catherine's Cowcam foreman, and Jesse Evans's gang member, Frank Baker. On March 9th, Morton and Baker were fatally shot attempting escape during transport to Lincoln's jail. Billy likely fired with the others. All claimed self-defense. Morton had grabbed the gun of posseman William McCloskey and murdered him. All this resistance led to ring backlash. By military intervention, obstructing of arrest warrants for Tunstall's murderers, an illegal proclamation by Governor Axtell to remove Justice of the Peace Wilson and to make Sheriff Brady the only law enforcer. The ring thus descended further into blatant and criminal tyranny. On February 19th, the day after Tunstall's killing, Alexander McSween naively requested soldiers for protection from Fort Stanton's commander, George Purrington. He did not guess that Sheriff Brady himself colluded with Governor Axtell to get troops approved for suppression from New Mexico's district commander, General Edward Hatch. So Purrington sent to Lincoln First Lieutenant Cyrus Delaney and a 9th Cavalry squad to the house. They enabled Tunstall's murderers hiding there to escape. Brady even led the cavalrymen to Dead Tunstall's store to get hay for their horses. Seeing that, McSween had Justice of the Peace Wilson issue an arrest warrant for hay theft against Brady. McSween and Wilson still thought law protected against the ring. On February 20th, Town Constable Atanasio Martinez, and Deputy Constables Billy Bonney and Fred Wade, accompanied by a citizens committee led by Hispanic leader and Lincoln County jailer Juan Patron, went to the house to serve Wilson's warrants for Tunstall's murderers. So Sheriff Brady arrested Martinez, Bonney, and Wade. He had no legal basis, but with ring-eyed hubris, he hissed that he had the power. He also confiscated Billy's Winchester .73 carbine, his prized possession, from Tunstall. Then he threw them into Lincoln's pit jail. They were held until February 22nd, after Tunstall's burial. But Brady kept Billy's carbine. Then boss Catron intervened. Brady had requested troops from him as U.S. Attorney. On March 3rd, it was Governor Axtell who telegrammed President Hayes, using the ring's usual outlawing. Axtell wrote, "I am unable to enforce the law and to protect life and property in this territory and request assistance from the President." On March 9th, with a Fort Stanton escort, Axtell arrived in Lincoln to obstruct justice directly. That repeated his 1876 Colfax County removal of their courts to shield Reverend Tolby's ring-eyed killers from prosecution. That day, Axtell issued an illegal proclamation removing Justice of the Peace Wilson to make his deputizing illegal. And he declared Sheriff Brady to be Lincoln County's only law enforcer. By the end of the year, it would get Axtell removed as governor, but it would be too late. The ring's murdering would be completed. So do not miss this key point. Legally appointed officials, Wilson, Brewer, Billy Bonney, and other Tunstall men, were illegally outlawed so the ring could get away with murder. But once again, Catron and his minions met the unexpected. Resistance continued. Montague Leverson, a politically connected Colorado friend of Cattle King John Chisholm, seeking a New Mexico Territory governorship for himself, went to Lincoln to intervene. On March 16th, he wrote to Secretary of the Interior Carl Schurz, enclosing a letter to President Hayes, blaming the ring's public officials for Tunstall's murder. That truth became Hayes's future investigator's job to hide. Leverson stated, "It is not likely that the British government will allow the murder of one of its subjects by United States officials and their appointees to pass without a rigorous investigation and a demand of indemnity for the family of the murdered man." Close quote. To be noted is that such reparations were commonly awarded, but the ring ended up blocking reparations to Tunstall's family because awarding them admitted his murder was by U.S. officials. And Leverson was unaware that Hayes and Schurz were ring-backing and covered up Mary McPherson's identical Colfax County exposés to them in 1877. On March 24th, Sheriff Brady tried to apprehend or murder Alexander McSween at John Chisholm's South Spring River Ranch by using Fort Stanton troops as his posse. He used the county sheriff's option to conscript soldiers for peacekeeping or pursuit of a felon, but McSween was successfully hidden. Truth and justice were closing in. It was time for the ring to murder again. But Catron and his minions didn't anticipate that the citizens were watching their own clock. It was time for war. In Talks 15 and 16, I'll present the revisionist history of the Lincoln County War and its final battle.